It came! It came! Alright guys, we're going to take a look today at what comes in the box of your wizard. Stay tuned. Alright guys, let's take a look at what we have here. Now, before I go any further, I want to be totally forthcoming. This is not my wizard. This is a neighbor's wizard. It just so worked out that there was a lot of interest in having a series going through, getting a wizard and what you should do with it. And he needed some help. So this is literally the out-of-the-box state of this wizard. So with that out of the way, these are the major components that you get out of the box. Okay? I'm going to start right here with the thing that most of you guys are, the most interested in. And that's the wizard itself. Now, as I kind of just flip this thing around, just for any of you guys who don't have the wizard yet or have not seen one, I just want you to kind of see what you're going to get here. Okay? So looking at this thing from the top, you get 4 motors, you get 4 ESCs. On the inside of this frame, you have an SP Racing F3 and a Maytech PDB, as well as a FlySky receiver, this being the transmitter. You have the receiver in here. You can see its antennas kind of hanging out the back here, as well as an Eachine video transmitter, and you can see its antenna here. Lastly, you do get an FPV camera. Okay? And there's some other external components that are more minor but are still here, and we want to keep in mind because we're going to talk about these, like these LEDs on the bottom of the quad. Okay? So we'll come back to this. You also get one single 3-cell battery. Okay? As well as a small IMAX RC balance charger. And then your FlySky FSI6 transmitter. That runs on AA batteries. Okay? So you got home and this thing was sitting on your steps. And you ripped open the packaging, you saw the box, you tore the box open, and the first thing you're going to do is plug the battery in and turn this thing on and go fly, right? Wrong! The mainstream hobby has a few best practices and configurations that they use to run these things, and as we go through we'll explain what those are and why. But what we're going to do before we do anything else is we are going to set this thing up and configure it to the standards. We're doing this partially because of safety, and then we're doing it also so that as you move forward in this hobby, you have points of reference that you can work with, because the way this thing is configured right now, you can't figure out how to turn this thing on. Now, first and foremost, let's talk about the arming of the quadcopter. Arming is the process of putting this thing in the mode that's ready to fly. And out of the box, and I'm not even going to plug it in and show you this, you don't have an arming switch, which is really the standard in the hobby, that you'll assign a switch, and when you flip it, you can fly the quad, and if you turn it off, it immediately makes the quad unflyable, and that's why it's called the arming switch. This does not use a switch out of the box. What you have to do is hold both sticks down and in for like 2 or 3 seconds, at which point the quad becomes armed, but you have no visible way of knowing. And if you didn't know this, you might power this thing up and throw the throttle up, at which point this thing's going to shoot into the air, or depending if you have the blades on wrong, it's going to start flipping and dancing, or whatever the case may be. Now, I'm not even going to plug this thing in and show you because it's not important. I personally feel that there's some optional hardware on this frame, and more than anything else, I'm talking about these motor guards. These make it hard as hell to hold on to this motor bell to stop it from spinning so that you can tighten this prop up enough to be able to fly the quad. I'm also not a fan of these LEDs being where they are because, you know, I don't live in the desert, and sometimes when I fly there might be a little bit of moisture on the ground, or who knows, and these things are not protected with any sort of waterproof coating. They do serve a purpose, especially from a learning perspective, but I think, I don't know, I took mine off. I'm just not very comfortable with these being here. They do not affect the battery life. They do not affect the quad's performance unless you get a short and kill this thing. And this one I'm going to leave up to you as optional. These I'm going to recommend you take off. Something to keep in mind when you do that, let me get my screws out here, is the screw length. Now, if you don't have a set of hardware available, extra screws in different lengths and whatnot, then I'm going to recommend that you get some. You can find this stuff on Amazon for not very much money. You could even start out with a small kit like this. That's the culmination of a couple kits. And personally, I've grown to become very fond of these slightly larger screws, and they also have the very large heads versus the small button tops. And I'm having a much better time with these, but that's a side point, so let me hop back to this. When you take these screws out, because you have to take these out in order to take these guards off, you're going to see that when you go to put the motor back in, that you don't need as much screw. Okay? And the size screw that we're probably going to need, I'm just looking in the frame, because at that point it's just really the frame that's coming into play. Looks like 8mm is going to be sufficient in order to hold these motors on. Yeah, we'll go with that. So let's say 7 to 8mm. I'm going to settle on 8s. And in fact, I'm going to give this guy buttons. So let's see here. There we go. That's an 8mm. So I just kind of throw everything into one spot because, frankly, I just fish out the size I need, even though it would be a little less hassle to have these more properly sorted. It's also a hassle to keep them more properly sorted. So yeah, when you go to put props on, really what you're going to do is you're going to hold the bell housing like this to stop it from spinning while you tighten the nut. And as you see, you really can't get a purchase on this. Okay? You really need to be able to grab that motor, which is why the first thing I want to do is take these protectors off. Now the other thing this gentleman has already done, and you guys take good note of this, is he's taken the antennas and zip tied them to these rear posts. These things, these antennas, were just shoved up inside of here, and they sort of work, but they're unreliable. There's times where the signal will not penetrate the carbon fiber very well. And so what he's done is he's got them external. He's got them out of the way of everything else that we're going to need to do, meaning your battery's going to go on top if you end up running some sort of GoPro session or some action camera. You know, it's going to go up here. And you want to keep these things out of the props because you don't want them getting chopped up all over hell in creation. So he's done a good job at putting those away. Now, the standard size for these is 1.5mm. Oh, sorry, 2mm. Okay. So we're going to use a 2mm hex head. So using this, what I'm going to do, and we can do this just one motor at a time. So I'm going to take these screws out. And just for him, I'm going to keep these screws in a different spot because I'll probably give these back to him. Now, at this point, it's a good idea to decide whether you want to keep those LEDs there or not. I'm going to tell you that for just a couple bucks, you can get LED bars that you can put in other places that I think have a little more value. One of the big problems with this, other than the lack of waterproofing, is the fact that you can only see them really well when the quad is flying away from you. Okay, because the back is going to be tilted up a little bit, Or if this thing's really high in the air, and when we get into it, that's not a very good practice when you're starting out either. But the second this thing turns to the side, you lose some visibility, and when it's coming back at you, you lose all the visibility, and orientation is going to be really important in this. So I'm just not a fan of these. I'm going to keep his on because I don't know what he wants to do. But if you're going to remove these, this is a good time to keep them out of the equation. Now, all it's going to do, it's going to loosen the motor up. What we want to do is then flip it back and take our shorter screws and put them in. Now, what I'm looking at and what I was doing when I was looking at the length of the screws, we ideally want these. Let me see if I can get this in a better spot here. We ideally want these screws long enough to go all the way through the frame, and in this case the LED boards, and into the base of the motor. There we go. Whoops. Good news is these motors have a lot of magnets in them, so things don't like to fall away from them very easily. Maybe it's like this. Alright, so what I'm looking at here is that this screw is going to go all the way through the frame. There we go, and I got that button just right on top of the LED there. And it's going to go into the base of the motor, but it's not going to go up into the windings. So if you look here, you can see those windings, and they do have a small protective coating on them that should stop, more than anything, it stops the electricity from flowing the wrong way through the coils, and it forces it to flow through the wire along the length of the wire and not jump from coil to coil. The other thing it's going to do is it's going to have a little bit of resistance to water and other outside environmental factors. What we don't want to do is have a screw so long that it goes up and touches these. That's going to be a huge problem because we don't want it to touch, let alone, because here's the other side, the other thing to consider. If this were to touch, it could also damage those coils. Okay? Now these motors, while I'm putting this back in, if you wanted to soft mount, now would be a good time to do that. A lot of people that act like it's totally necessary, and I'm going to tell you from experience that it's not totally necessary. Your quad will fly without it, and starting out, it's not a huge deal. But if you wanted to be preemptive, you could put some soft mounting pads like these. These came out of one of the recent drop boxes or quad boxes or something. And there's even, just TPU printed mounts like these. Those absorb a little bit of vibration as well. And you just sandwich them here in between the motor and the frame. You can see the holes kind of line up there. And it just pulls some vibration out of the equation, because these motors are going to produce small vibrations which will travel up the arm into the flight controller, which has a gyroscope on it, which is very sensitive to vibrations, and what it's trying to sense is the motion of the quadcopter to be able to give instructions to the flight controller about what adjustments to make to keep its orientation, heading, so on and so forth. Anyway, let's go ahead and feed this back up in here. I'm going to let him soft mount his own motors if he wants to do that. Now, when you're putting these screws in, you don't want these to be so tight that they could potentially strip the threads, because these bases on these motors are a little soft, okay? And that's a little bit the quality of the motors, but they're not bad motors. We're not going to worry about swapping them out right away. You're going to tear some stuff up, and we want you to tear up what's already here. Now, what I did was I put this screw most of the way in, but I left it loose so that this thing can move a little bit in the case that I need to line up these holes a little better. Once you get two in, you should be in pretty good shape. But I'm just in the habit of getting them all started before I get carried away tightening them down. This last one I'll go ahead and take all the way. Now, once it makes good firm contact, I usually give just a little bit of pressure. It's probably equivalent to almost 1/8 of a turn. Okay? Because, yeah, I want them to be tight, but they don't need to be on there so tight that, you know, you end up breaking something or that you're never going to be able to get it off. Because once in a while, you're going to do periodic checks of these to make sure that they're still tight. You can, once you're comfortable with everything as well, use something like Loctite in order to make sure that those screws stay put once you run them in. Again, I'm going to let him do this if he so chooses. If you do this, make sure that you are not using the red Loctite. The color of this is red, but inside it's blue. Okay, the color of this here, actually this is even kind of purplish, but do not use the red. The red requires a lot of heat. It's kind of a, not kind of, it's a permanent thread locking solution, and they are not meant to be used over and over again. It is not meant for screws to be run in and out over and over and over again. It's meant for hardware to be put in place one time. Amen. Okay, so this is what we're going to end up with. And again, here you can see the thing is that I can grab this. If I'm going to go ahead and put a prop on and move this nut around, I can hold that bell housing and hold that still enough to get that prop nut tight. Over here, I just can't. There's not many options. And you know, I have large fingers and thumbs too, you know. Fat guy hands incoming. And once that prop is on here, to be able to get everything into that little bit of space, you know, even the pad of my thumb, even the side of my thumb, to be able to hold that is just a stretch. So, we're going to repeat this for the other motors here. Okay, so we've got all the screws replaced, and we've got all those motor protectors off. Okay? The next thing I want to do, because when you get this, for instance, the battery strap is not going to be run through the top plate, even though it is here on my neighbor's. Because again, he did some of this. He was really trying his damnedest to get this thing to work, and he just couldn't. And under normal circumstances, I would really make him do this himself, because I'm an enabler. I like to show people and teach people how to do things. Nothing I hate more than people being reliant on me, because what happens is they want you to do all the hard work so they can sit around and do what they want to do. And you know, a lot of them think that's ideal, and if they can find somebody to push the hard stuff onto, then they will. And I just don't play that game very often. I am the guy who teaches a man to fish. They will not give you a fish. I might once. In this case, he's getting a couple of fish, but that's alright. Alright, get this top plate off of here. Now, when you go to take this off, it may be a little tight. I'm going to show you here in a moment why that is. The first reason being because this XT60 connector and the power leads are coming up through this grommet. Now that's not such a bad thing, and I'm going to leave that there. Okay, the other reason is because on these side plates there are these tabs that sit inside these notches, and sometimes they can be a little tight. Now for now, I'm going to go ahead and just pop these out so you can see what's involved here. Okay? Because what we've got here is the flight controller, that's right up here, and then underneath we have the power distribution board. Okay? The battery leads go directly to this, and on this is some hardware in order to regulate voltage to different components and whatnot. For instance, the board can only handle 5-volt input. The LEDs, 5 volts, but these require all the voltage you can get to them. And your battery, let me see if this one even has it on there. It looks like it's missing the label. A 3-cell battery at its peak voltage is going to output something like 12.6 or 12.8. I don't remember because I don't use 3-cell much. I'm a 4-cell kind of guy. But This will just be floating around in here, and this is your receiver. This receives the instructions from the transmitter in order to tell the flight controller what to do. And what my neighbor has done is to kind of secure that here to the top plate using the Velcro strap. Now I'm going to do something just a little bit different here. This is what I used to do, and I'm going to be honest, I really got to despise having stuff on my top plate. So what we're going to do is use a little bit of double-sided tape. There we go. To just kind of stick this thing on top of the flight controller. Doesn't take much. What you're trying to stop it from doing is just flipping and flopping all over the place in there. I'm going to stick this on here. And then in a few moments, what we're going to do is just stick that right on top there. Alright, so right now, what's happening, there's this little plug up here. I'm going to go ahead and just pull this out. I don't want you to be afraid to take this thing apart, okay? This little plug is what goes to the receiver to receive instructions. And when this comes, this is set up for using PPM or PWM or something of that nature. Now what we want to use going forward is iBus. Okay? And what iBus, what this is telling us to do, because when it comes, it's plugged into these three all the way over here. Boop. We want to take this out of here, and when we put it back, we want to run it across the top. Okay? So you can go ahead and make those changes here and make sure that this thing's pretty solid in here as well. Yeah, let's go ahead and pull that out. That'll make it a little easier. That's just the camera. There we go. And then we're just going to take this and kind of stick it right on top here. Doesn't need to be perfect per se. In fact, I can see that we probably need another piece of that tape. Now there's other places you could put that as well. For instance, we could put it back here, right to the frame. That's okay. This is one of the larger receivers that you'll ever see used in a quadcopter, and really only in this one, I believe. Most of the time you can find something a lot smaller that's going to mount a lot easier. In fact, a lot of the newer ones even mount directly to the stack in some fashion. This being called the stack because it is the stack of hardware. And the more you get, the bigger your stack gets. And it's all about them big stacks, baby. There we go. Try that again. There we go. Okay, we just want that to kind of be anchored there pretty well. If we want to pull this off, we just pull it and the tape will come with it. Alright. Now the last item, if you did decide to forego the LEDs and to take those off, you're going to have to take this flight controller off and unsolder them. Now right there, some of you guys have already been turned off to that idea, and that's fine. I'm going to show you what I think you should do before you get too far along with flying this with those LEDs on there. Now, last piece of hardware I didn't really cover was this right here, and this is your video transmitter. This takes the video in the event that you are going to have goggles and fly FPV, and sends the video to the goggles. Now, if you're not going to start flying with goggles right away, you can unplug this and it'll save a little bit of power. Truth be told, they don't use a whole lot of power, so that's not a whole lot of benefit in that. But they do use some. You will also potentially extend the life of this by having it unplugged when you're not using it, because the one thing they do generate is a lot of heat. And what is bad for electrical components? That's right, it's heat. So what we want to do is just take some wire cutters, because out of the box this thing comes zip tied right up here. And we're going to take that off of there in just a moment. In fact, I'm going to clip this off of here just to make it a little easier. One of the #1 problems people have with these wizards are breaking the video transmitters. Okay? In order to try to extend the life of this, I'm going to recommend that you take this thing off of this top plate. And it should pull right out of that grommet. And you can leave that grommet there. It's not hurting anything. But we're going to use some double-sided tape again. And we're going to stick a couple pieces right down here on the frame, on the bottom of the frame. Let me tighten up those posts a little bit. Before you go sticking double-sided tape on top of double-sided tape, make sure you're removing that, otherwise it's going to pull off at some point. Alright. And what we're going to do, there's other places you could stick this. I'm going to give you a couple options here that I think you're going to get the most mileage out of. The first is just getting this off of the top frame and out of that grommet. Okay? And what you can do, you'll notice now, you can slide these power leads a little bit and get a little more room. You can stick this thing right here to the bottom, to the frame right there. Now one of your other options would be to kind of stick this to the side of the stack somehow. We're just going to stick it here for now, and that's going to get us close enough for what I'm trying to do here. This is not the best option, but without doing some soldering or buying a whole new video transmitter, you're not going to get a best option. There we go. And that's good enough, because the last thing we can do would be to run a zip tie around it just to kind of help hold it in place. And one of the things that hopefully you don't learn the hard way is that you're not trying to permanently affix any of this. You want it to have some wiggle, because if it doesn't, that's when things break. Nothing on here should be put on with being totally permanent in mind. Alright. And we're just going to tighten this enough to kind of hold that down there. There we go. Now what I used, because see, we have these slots here that are going to hold our side plates in. I don't want anything getting in the way of those side plates. So what I use, there's 2 holes back here. In fact, let me slide this back just a little bit so it sits better before that double-sided tape gets too well, no, it's pretty well in place. That's alright. That'll still hold it. Anyway, what I've done is there's 2 holes over here on the side that will be inside the plate, and I've just run the zip tie through those holes. You're going to find that zip ties are your friend. They may break, they may do other things, but they're cheap, easy to kind of anchor stuff down and hold it. Alright, so now we're set up, and we can take the power cable here for the video transmitter and just run that right over here to the side. Make sure I'm putting that in right. Oh, of course I was trying to put it in upside down. And if you're like me and you have a hard time getting those fingers in there, just get some pliers. And even if you're just holding on to the wire, because you're just trying to get this started, there we go. Good to go. And that's much better. So what we end up with is this top plate, alright, with nothing on it. That's what you want. Let's get our camera back in here. And we're just going to set that in the notches. Now, I'm also going to go ahead and donate one of these wonderful double-stitched, not plastic welded, but double-stitched, rubberized battery straps, and donate one to my neighbor Raymond. Because the more straps you have on these batteries, the better off they are going to be. Alright. That's good. Let's stick these side plates back in. Now make sure that the plate with the hole in it, that hole lines up with your flight controller's USB port. Is going to be very, very important. And we're just going to make sure that everything that is internal to the frame, like all these little wires floating around, are inside of the frame. Can't see that side. That helps. There we go. All right. Let's put this top frame on, this top plate on. We just want to make sure that all of the tabs are inside the slots before we get too carried away here. Looks good. And we can start running our screws back in. Now this is also a good time. You see the length of these screws? They work, and they work fine, but longer screws will actually give you more strength inside those standoffs. So I'm going to recycle. I'm not going to worry about the bottoms for Ray here. Again, if he wants to do that, he can go ahead and do that himself. But I'm going to do that to the tops here. And once it makes contact, quarter turn is more than sufficient. I like to start by putting one in the front, and then one diagonally across from it in the back, and then I'll start running all the other screws in. Alright. Little plug for the drone logic. Hey Nick, I don't know if it's a possibility or what, but you're going to want to make sure this stuff says the drone logic on it, because there is a drone logic and it is different. Or have the URL added on here somewhere. The drone logic. The drone logic.com. Alright, now what you can do with this when you do get an antenna, let me go ahead and get one here. You can cut this grommet out of here, at which point this might fit down through there, but probably not. But you can bend this just a little bit as well, depending on the type you have or what's going on here. On mine, I just kind of cut this whole section off here. You could even just feed it up through this hole and slide this forward a little bit more. Now the zip tie won't fit where it is, but I don't think that's going to be a major problem for you. But if we have this scoot back enough, yeah, I got more top plates. I'll give Ray another one if he is too upset about this. I'm just going to cut this tab right off of here, because frankly it's easier. Remove that piece of that grommet, and now this will screw right into here. Okay? And that's going to give you the best of all kinds of worlds, because what we could even do to reinforce this, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people end up breaking this VTX, and where it breaks is right here where this 90 degree is. Well, if you have a long enough antenna here, in fact, let me put Ray's, I'm going to donate this too, because I just, frankly, don't use these much anymore. take another zip tie. Doesn't have to be too big or anything. In fact, let me use one of these little yellow ones. There we go. And we're going to run it through this hole here and down and around the antenna. In fact, let's do it this way. Anyway, all I'm getting at is that by putting this thing somewhere... Oh, I know what I can do. I'm going to go ahead and make a loop down here. There we go. Ow. I'm not going to tighten that all the way. I'm going to leave a loop there. And then I'll take another one of these and put it around the antenna itself. Either way, you know, I mean, none of this has to be perfect. You just do what works, right? And what we're trying to do is secure things enough to where they move, but that they still have flexibility. There we go. Just like that. We'll clip these off of here. And I'm going to clip these off because that's what I just stabbed myself on. There we go, much better. Now that looks like something we can work with. That's not going to break or tear something up too much. Likewise, you do get some strength from these zip ties, but even in the event that something really snags on this, they will go ahead and break off. And hopefully not snatch this off, because that's the big thing. If that 90-degree breaks off, you can still use this VTX, but again, we're back in learning how to solder land. Just from a hardware perspective and getting this thing set up to give you the most bang for your buck, the best ease of use, that's where we're at. We've removed the motor guards. We've replaced the screws in the top plate with the longer screws that we took out of the motors because we had to use 8mm screws to hold the motors in once there wasn't this extra material that we had to go through. And we've secured all the items on the inside, the receiver, the video transmitter to the bottom plate and or the stack, as well as secured our receiver antennas. So hopefully you guys feel pretty good about where we're at and what we've done today, and you feel much better about getting this thing up and ready to fly. Stay tuned for the next episode where we configure Betaflight. And do not put propellers on this in the house. Do not put propellers on this yet, and do not try to fly it yet. You are going to hurt yourself or somebody or break the quad. Just hang tight for the next episode. No happy crashing yet.